The moment I remember most clearly isn't the loudest one. It isn't when my brother stood up at his own rehearsal dinner and raised his glass and said, in front of 47 people, that he was the one who had kept this family standing. It isn't when my mother nodded and dabbed her eyes like it was the truest thing she'd ever heard. The moment I remember most clearly is the one right after. When my father looked directly at me across that table and smiled and said, "See? That's what it looks like when someone steps up." I said nothing. I had a folder in my bag. I had brought it with me that night because some part of me had known, not hoped. Known. But before I tell you what was in that folder, and what happened when I put it on that table, let me ask you something. What time is it where you are right now? And where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Because I want you to know that wherever you are, whatever time it is, this story is for anyone who has ever been the person holding everything together while someone else took the bow. My name doesn't matter. What matters is that for 6 years, I was the financial spine of a family that called my brother the responsible one. Let me explain who I am, because this is the part people always question, and I understand why. I was 26 when this started. I had graduated with a degree in supply chain management, landed a coordinator role at a mid-sized distribution company in Columbus, Ohio, and worked my way up to senior operations manager by 28. I was not wealthy. I was not a trust fund. I was someone who learned early how to budget, how to save, and how to say no to herself so she could say yes to her family. My family ran a small printing and signage business. My father had started it in the late 90s, and for most of my childhood it did fine. Not great. Fine. We were comfortable in the way that meant the lights stayed on, but the dishwasher ran twice before it actually cleaned anything. My brother, I'll call him Derek, was 3 years younger than me. He was the one people lit up for at family dinners. Not because he had done anything remarkable, but because he was warm and funny and easy to be around in a way that I, apparently, was not. I was described, from a very young age, as serious, responsible, too focused. My aunt once told my mother at Thanksgiving that I had an old soul, and she did not mean it as a compliment. Derek dropped out of community college after 1 semester. My parents told everyone he was taking a break to help with the business. He mostly came in late and handled the front desk when he felt like it. I moved to Columbus for work. I called every Sunday. I sent birthday cards and remembered everyone's dietary preferences at Christmas, and I did not, for a very long time, let myself feel the particular loneliness of being the child who was appreciated in theory and overlooked in practice. The first time my father called me for money, I was 26. The business had a tax issue underpayment, a surprise bill, about $4,000. He didn't ask, exactly. He said they were in a tight spot, and he wasn't sure what they were going to do, and he went quiet in that way. That meant the conversation wasn't over. I transferred the money that night. He said thank you. He said I was a good daughter. He said he would pay it back. He did not pay it back. I told myself it was fine. It was a gift. Families help each other. The second call came 8 months later. Equipment lease was overdue. Could I cover 2 months while they sorted out a slow client payment? $3,800. I covered it. The third call came 4 months after that, and then the calls stopped being occasional. They became a rhythm. Quarterly, then monthly, then sometimes twice in a month. There was always a reason. A slow season, a client who didn't pay, an insurance renewal my father had missed, a supply cost that spiked, a payroll gap when they picked up a part-time employee. I kept a spreadsheet, not because I was planning anything, because I am the kind of person who tracks numbers. It is how my brain works. I logged every transfer, every date, every stated reason. By the time I was 30, that spreadsheet had 41 entries. The total was just under $94,000. I want you to sit with that number for a second. $94,000 over 4 years. I had not taken a vacation in 2 years. I drove a 2016 Honda Civic with a crack in the dashboard that I had been meaning to fix for 18 months. I was contributing the minimum to my 401k because there wasn't room to do more. I was not suffering. But I was not living the life someone with my income and my position should have been living. And the entire time, every family holiday, every Sunday phone call, every birthday dinner, when I drove the 2 hours back to Dayton to be there, the conversation was about Derek, about how well he was doing at the shop, about how he had really stepped up lately, about how he had this natural instinct for people, this warmth, this work ethic, that had just taken a little time to show up. My mother said it the most. She would reach across the table and put her hand on Derek's arm and say, this one is going to carry this family forward. I would cut my chicken and say nothing. I don't want you to think I was a saint. I was not. I was a person who had made a calculation many times and kept arriving at the same answer. If I stop, the business fails, my parents lose what they built, and I will have to live with that. It was not nobility. It was a particular kind of trapped. I had been raised to be the one who handled things, and I had never learned how to put that down. There was also something else. Something I am not proud of. Some part of me believed that eventually they would see it. That there would be a moment of clarity, a conversation where my father looked at me and said, I know what you've been doing. I know what it cost you. Thank you. I kept waiting for that conversation. It never came. Instead, what came was Derek's engagement. He proposed to his girlfriend, I'll call her Priya, in November. She was lovely. Genuinely lovely. Warm and kind, and completely unaware of any of the financial history of the family she was marrying into. I liked her immediately, and I felt a specific sadness about that, because I knew things she didn't know, and I hadn't decided yet what to do with what I knew. The wedding was set for the following September. My parents went into planning mode with an energy I had never seen directed at anything involving me. My mother called me 3 times in 1 week not to ask how I was, but to ask if I thought the venue deposit was reasonable, and whether Priya's colors would work with the tablecloths they had at the family friends' banquet hall. I said yes to everything. I smiled at everything. And then my father called me in January to say the printing business had lost its largest commercial contract. A corporate client that had been with them for 11 years had moved to a bigger provider. The revenue loss was significant. And with the wedding coming up, and the costs they had already committed to, could I help bridge the gap? I asked how much. He said probably around $16,000 over the next few months. I did not say yes immediately. That was new. I said I needed to think about it. He said he understood. Then he said, you know, Derek is really pouring himself into the business right now. He's trying so hard. I'd hate for him to see it fail right before his wedding. That would just crush him. There it was. I said I'd let him know. I transferred the first installment 3 days later. I don't fully understand why, even now. Old pattern, old fear, old hope. But something had shifted. I started looking at the spreadsheet differently. I had kept it as a record, neutral and clean. I started to look at it as a document. I made copies. I pulled my bank statements and matched every entry. I requested records from my bank going back 6 years. I organized it in a way that someone else could follow. I told myself I was just being thorough. I told myself I wasn't planning anything. Then came the rehearsal dinner. It was held at a family friend's restaurant. Nice, intimate. My parents had paid for it with money I had transferred 2 months earlier, though I only confirmed that detail later. There were immediate family members, and a handful of Priya's relatives, and some close friends. 47 people. I counted. I had driven down from Columbus that afternoon. I had the folder in my bag. I had not planned to use it. I want to be clear about that. I had brought it the way you bring an umbrella when you're not sure about the weather, just in case. Dinner was fine, the food was good. Priya looked happy. Derek was in his element telling stories, making people laugh, moving around the room with that ease he had always had. Then, my father stood up to give a toast. He talked about Derek as a boy. He talked about watching him grow into a man. He talked about how proud he was of the way Derek had shown up for the family business. Kept it running, made sacrifices. He said that Derek had proven that the family had a future and that Priya was gaining not just a husband but a man who understood loyalty and hard work and what it meant to take care of the people you loved. He did not say my name once. I have been in rooms before where I was invisible. I know what that feels like. It is a particular kind of cold. You are present and absent simultaneously, and there is nothing to push against because the omission is never stated directly. No one says you don't matter. They just speak as if you aren't there. I sat in that cold for about 4 minutes. Then Derek stood up and added to the toast. He talked about the business. He said he knew it hadn't been easy, but he had fought for it. He said he had made sure the family didn't have to worry. He said Priya was the woman who had stood by him through the hard years, through the uncertainty, through the times when he wasn't sure things were going to work out. I watched Priya's face while he talked. She believed him. Why wouldn't she? He believed himself. My father looked at me then, with that smile, and said, "See? That's what it looks like when someone steps up." And everyone at the table near us nodded and turned back to their dessert. And the moment passed, and the room moved on. I reached into my bag. I want to be careful here about how I describe what happened next, because I have told this story to people who hear it as dramatic, as a big confrontation scene, and it was not that. It was almost quiet. I stood up. My mother looked at me and smiled, assuming I was going to add to the toasting. My father tilted his head slightly. I said, "I want to say something." The room settled. I said I was so happy for Derek and Priya. I meant that. I said Priya was gaining a wonderful family, and I hoped she would be very happy. Then I said that I had been thinking about the business, and how much it had meant to our family, and how important it was that everyone around the table understood how it had actually survived. I placed the folder on the table. Not dramatically. Not slammed down. Just placed. Like you'd set down a coffee cup. I said, "This is a record of every financial transfer I've made to the family business over the last 6 years. Bank statements, dates, amounts, and the reason given at the time of each request. The total is $112,000. The number had grown since I'd last added it up. I had done the final tally the week before. The room was very quiet. My father's smile had not moved yet. It took a few seconds. Then it did. He said, "What is she talking about?" My mother said, very softly, "Maya." I said I wasn't angry. I said that clearly, and I meant it by that point. The anger had burned through a long time ago. What was left was something colder and cleaner. I said I had been glad to help. I said I understood that businesses go through hard times. I said I had made those transfers because I loved this family, and because I had believed, every single time, that it was what you did for the people you loved. Then I said that going forward, I would not be making any further transfers. That I hoped the business would stabilize. That I was not asking to be repaid. And then I said one more thing. I said, I just wanted everyone in this room to know the actual story. Derek looked at the folder. He had not touched it. Priya was watching him. My father said, "You can't, this isn't," and then stopped. He reached for the folder. I had made copies. The folder on the table was one set. I had another at home, scanned and saved in 3 places. He opened it. He looked at the first page, a summary sheet I had made, dates in one column, amounts in another, running total on the right. He did not turn pale exactly. It was more like the certainty left his face. Like a screen going dark. My mother said, "How much did you say?" I said $112,000. Over 6 years. The most recent transfer was 11 weeks ago. Derek said, very quietly, "That's not possible." I looked at him. I said, "Which part?" He didn't answer. Priya reached over and touched his arm, and he did not acknowledge it. He was looking at the page my father had set down. I picked up my bag. My father said, "Don't leave. We need to talk about this." I said, "There isn't anything to talk about tonight. Tonight is Derek and Priya's evening, and I don't want to take any more of it." I looked at Priya then. I said, "I'm sorry for the timing. That wasn't fair to you." She looked at me with an expression I still think about sometimes. Not shock exactly, more like she was rearranging something behind her eyes. She said, "No. Thank you for saying it." I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking lot for about 20 minutes. I was not shaking. I was not crying. I felt something I can only describe as structural, like a wall that has been load-bearing finally being allowed to come down because you've built something else to hold the weight. My phone started going. My mother first, then my father. Then a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my aunt. I let them all go to voicemail. Derek did not call that night. He called the next morning. Early, I answered. He said, "Is it true?" I said yes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Why didn't you tell me?" I thought about that for a moment. I said, "Because I kept thinking Dad would." Another silence. He said, "I didn't know. I want you to know that. I genuinely did not know." And here is the thing about Derek that I have had to sit with, that I don't think makes a clean story. I believed him. He was thoughtless. He was self-centered in the particular way of people who have been made to feel that the world arranges itself around them. But he was not malicious. He had been handed a version of the family story, and had accepted it without looking too closely, the way people do when the story is flattering. That didn't make it okay, but it was true. I told him I didn't want anything from him except honesty going forward. He asked if I would still come to the wedding. I said I would think about it. My father called that afternoon. He did not apologize. I want to be precise about that. He said that the numbers were probably accurate, but that I had chosen a terrible time and place, and that what I had done had been hurtful and humiliating, and that I should have come to him privately if I had concerns. I let him finish. Then I said, "I gave you 6 years of private. I gave you $112,000 of private. I made phone call after phone call and transfer after transfer without a word in front of anyone. I think I gave private every chance it was going to get." He hung up. My mother called 2 days later. That call was harder. My mother has a way of making herself the one who is hurt no matter what the topic, and she used it fully in that conversation. She said I had embarrassed the family. She said Priya's relatives had been at that dinner. She said she didn't know how to face people. She said she had always known I held things over people. That last one landed. Not because it was true, but because it was the instinct to take the thing I had finally said out loud and make it evidence of a flaw in me rather than a response to what had been done. I said, "I don't want to fight with you. I love you. But I need you to understand that I cannot keep funding a version of this family that treats me like I don't exist." She cried. I stayed on the line. Eventually she said, "I didn't know it was that much." I said, "I know." She said, "We should have been keeping track." I said, very gently, "Someone was." She didn't have anything to say to that. The wedding happened in September. I went. I wore a green dress, and I danced at the reception, and I gave a toast that was warm and genuine, and said nothing about money or history. Priya hugged me afterward and held on for a beat longer than expected. She whispered, "He told me everything. We're going to figure it out." I don't know exactly what figure it out means for them. I hope it means Derek learns to see the people around him more clearly. I hope it means Priya goes in with her eyes open. I hope it means the business finds its footing without relying on someone who can't say no. What it means for me is this: I still talk to my family. I still drive to Dayton for holidays. I still love them in the way that is older than logic, that doesn't require them to deserve it every day. But I have not made a single transfer since that night. My father has not asked. I think some part of him understood, when he looked at that first page and the certainty left his face, that the account was closed. Not in anger, just closed. I've been putting that money into my own savings instead. Last spring I booked a trip to Portugal. 2 weeks. I stayed in a place with a little balcony that looked out over the water, and I drank coffee in the morning and watched the light change on the river, and I did not check my phone for 3 hours at a stretch. It was the first vacation I had taken in 4 years. I thought about the folder, about how long I had carried the numbers without showing them to anyone, about how I had believed, for a very long time, that being seen was something you had to earn from people who had already decided not to look. I don't believe that anymore. The thing about documentation is that it doesn't need you to be loud. It doesn't need you to perform certainty or demand recognition. It just needs to be accurate and complete and placed quietly on the table at the right moment. The truth, I've found, doesn't ask for permission. It just waits until you're ready to let it speak. If this story sounded familiar, if you recognize something in it, I want to hear from you. Not just what time it is and where you're watching from, though I still want to know that too. I want to know if you've been the one holding the folder. If you've been waiting for someone to finally see the numbers, drop it below. And if this reached you today, please like and stay close. Because there's more where this came from.